It may be true, as they said, that Harvard has ruined more good black men than bad whiskey, but this 1972 Harvard Business School report on the music industry does everything to make my point. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Welcome back to I Mix What I Like. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Please do like, share, subscribe. If you are not already a member of the Patreon or of the channel, please consider doing so you will be part of the group that gets to see these videos first. Yay! Oh, buddy, especially after the David Banner video I did the other day, my point about the claims Banner made that we've given away hip hop, that we once had it, gave away control, and therefore should give up on the concept of organized and unionized labor. This report shows, again, how that logic is wildly flawed. As I and others have been making the argument for a long time, again, given the context of settler colonialism, anything that is produced within that context is automatically going to be set in motion, put in part, forced to succumb to the process and the institutions that already exist that allow the process or the mechanism that become the mechanism of colonization to occur. And in this case, as I've said about hip hop, the natural resource that is produced by the black community as a colony is mined for its value to the colonizer. And once it's shown to have some value materially in terms of producing wealth, or immaterially in terms of producing dominant ideas and narratives and frames that would suppress and manage public opinion to the point, and political consciousness and radical political consciousness to the point of being a malleable public opinion shaped around the interests of those who rule and own, then it does. Then that's what happens. And this report helps us understand that. So let's have a look. So the Harvard report, published in 1972 originally, and then as Dr. Logan Westbrooks tells us, it has sort of disappeared until republished in 2017, and for the better part of 50 years had become part of rumors and whispers and conspiracies, some of which I think have even made it to me. And but that Westbrooks, because of his long time playing that, as I understood it from his bio, that Clarence Avant role, that black go-getter for white capital, the one who manages, as Westbrooks apparently did, the music industry and elements of it, the black elements of it, for the white owners of the music industry. That's how he comes across. I'll put his bio in the show description. You can look for yourself, but it's a long, extensive bio talking about his career in the music industry, being brought in at one point and hired by Clive Davis, of course, and he is clearly an Obama, NAACP, kind of liberal black Democrat. And kind of most bothersome to me is that, according to his bio, his doctorate is an honorary one. So it's not a PhD, and not one I think he should be using to parade on a book like this to suggest some and admittedly, now I've noticed that, and maybe there's some good reason for that, given some of what I've seen even in my own comments section about what people think they do or do not know. I understand now why so many YouTubers will use a moment of each video, to reintroduce themselves. So again, I am Jared Ball. I have an actual doctorate, a PhD in journalism and mass communication from the University of Maryland at College Park. I got that after getting a master's degree in Africana Studies from the Africana Studies and Research Center at Cornell University, that then, under the leadership of its founding director, Dr. James Turner, the late, great Dr. James Turner. And I have 25, 30 years experience in the classroom. I teach at Morgan State University, a 4-4. That is 4 courses every semester, where I am, by the way, again, a tenured and full professor of Africana and Communication Studies, teaching in the Black Studies program, a little bit in sociology, a little bit in the history department. And within that 25, 30 years, there's also not only the teaching experience and my relative relationship to academia, but a lot of support for radical grassroots organization and underground media development, production, and communication. Unsanctioned communication is what I've written about. It's been the focus of my limited academic intellectual production, and certainly the focus of my media production and my radio work, which is itself is old, about 25, 30 years. So if I continue to do this, I will definitely try to find a way to be quicker in a summary, maybe come up with a quicker tagline for it, but there it is nonetheless. I also, by the way, think it, again, is inappropriate if you get an honorary doctorate to call yourself a doctor. It is not a PhD. It is not having gone through the coursework, the examinations, the dissertation writing, the defense of your dissertation, or your thesis at the master's level. None of that. I had to sit in front of Dr. James Turner and a committee and defend my thesis on, at the time, Dr. John Henrik Clarke. So yeah, this is not that. This is not that. So, but nonetheless, all of that aside, what appears to be Westbrook's political position aside, we don't need the author necessarily for their analysis, in as much as in some cases we need them for just the details and the information. And at least we got that here. So there's great value to this. Let's check it out a little bit. As he outlines here, after almost 50 years, it's time to set the record straight. A study of the soul music environment prepared for Columbia Records Group, or the Harvard Report as it's called, has been discussed by many, maligned by some, and misunderstood by most. It was commissioned in 1972 by Columbia Records Group, CBS Records, to determine the feasibility and profitability of delving into black music marketing. And I like the way they put it there, because it's the marketing of black music that becomes somewhat important here in terms of becoming the mechanism of management, ownership, control, and ultimately dissemination. I, as Dr. Westbrook says, was the liaison between CBS Records and Harvard Business School, and I have the original copy of the Harvard Report as it was presented to me. He says this is the first time it has ever been fully published, and I'm glad that it is. One thing he says here at the conclusion of his introduction is that a philosophical question arises about the ability of a small company's survival when partnering with a powerful corporation. Can they exist together in a symbiotic relationship, or is it inevitable that one will be swallowed up by the other? Is it cultural appropriation, or is it just business? You, the reader, can now decide. We should already be clear on that, though. In the context of a settler colony, in the context of capitalism, there is nothing that can be produced that isn't going to be appropriated culturally. There is nothing that can be produced by the oppressed that isn't going to fall in to this process. We're starting on Monday morning the 100 years celebration of Frantz Fanon and Patrice Lumumba over on Black Liberation Media, so make sure you check that out. And one of the things Fanon is very clear about is the totality, the all-encompassing nature of the colonial experience. So we shouldn't be at all confused or questioning this issue here. It is always going to be culturally appropriated, again, even when we like it. In fact, especially when we like it. Because as this report helps us see, what we like has been mined from what we are producing, at least theoretically, organically, but it becomes a version, or what Fanon says, an ossified in its colonial form version of what we produce that is then marketed back to us and produced and imposed on us as something that we like. And therefore, we should be that much more suspicious of it. So just quickly going through some of the highlights of this report, it's not incredibly deep, and it's not incredibly... it's not that deep. The report isn't that long, but it does offer up a couple of very revealing points here. So as they say here in their major conclusion, the primary conclusions resulting from this study are: 1, a market opportunity exists in the soul segment of the music market. Columbia Record Group's past efforts to cultivate this market have lacked virtually all of the elements critical for success. And to capitalize on the market opportunity, CRG must significantly modify and substantially broaden its current efforts to cultivate that market. Again, it's important to understand that even when we like something, even when it is something that we are seemingly organically producing, a lot of our interest in it in terms of how it is organized and disseminated and produced and managed in terms of its wealth is a cultivated process. It's we are, as a market, made. Find what little bits that they do that they like, give them a version of it that we manage and make benefit of, and in that process, there is your market. It's interesting here, they talk a little bit about what is soul content. To what extent can you measure soul content? And it's interesting. You can pause the video here if you like to see how they lay out. James Brown has almost all the soul content, and Dionne Warwick has almost none. That's interesting. As they say here, beyond the problem of market definition, and this is why this whole genre creation in music is so shady and fraudulent, calling Black American classical music jazz, calling something hip hop, calling something soul, and in today's word, pop, indie, whatever, all of it is so that they can market and manage and manipulate the popularity, the sales, and of course the benefit of all of that exchange. And to my point, also be sure to create markets, use genre to separate categorically for promotion, ad revenue, manipulation, and then all of it is done to very similarly it feels like there's a parallel to this in terms of what has happened at the national level, carving up Africa into portions that could be branded and genred into manageable entities so that the process of extraction and colonization would be more eased, put at ease. It's the same thing that seems to happen here culturally. Once you divide everything up, it's easier to target your ad revenue, your marketing, your attempts at manipulation, and your segmenting of the community. So, but beyond the problem of market definition is the difficulties in quantifying the market. None of the companies in the soul market, nor the entire record industry for that matter, are freestanding, publicly owned. They are either subsidiaries or divisions of conglomerates or privately held. As a consequence, published information is scarce. So they're trying to figure out, again, first of all, the point is that to my criticism of David Banner's comments the other day, there has never been a situation where Black music is being produced in some Black controlled, organized, owned way. As this report talks a little bit about, to the extent that there are Black owned record labels or outlets for performance, et cetera, they are small. They are going back to the initial question asked, can a small company survive without partnering with a more powerful corporation? Well, it can if it doesn't want to grow. It can if it doesn't want to become wealth producing in the ways that we are often mythologized into believing will occur. And to the point being made here from the very beginning, it has always been a situation where private companies, when subsidiaries of larger conglomerates, are in control here. That is certainly the case today. They talk a little bit about how Black music has become national in character. I think that's speaking more to the national character of Black communities and the nation within a nation. But then as they point out here, there's been some influence on popular music culture because, again, the history of this country's pop culture is inextricably tied to Black performance to suit white affluent tastes. So of course there's going to be some, hey, what are those Negroes doing over there? We kind of like that. Remember those stories about Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis hanging out behind Black juke joints, peeking in and then stealing all the, remember all it? I mean, that still continues. White folks, hey, what's happening over there? That's cool. But as they point out here, the historic disinterest in the Black record buying market by major record companies gave rise to a tier of small independent record companies which catered to it. At that time, the Black market consisted of local regional audiences with particular tastes. This is an absolute parallel to the history of Black capitalism. As a subsidiary of white capital, not as something that can produce liberation, and only existed to the extent that white corporations were not interested in the Black buying market. As that has increasingly shifted and changed, the promotion of Black buying power as actual political and economic power has continued to confuse folks. But this is exactly the same thing that's happening here within the music industry. Subsidiaries and operating in spaces at the time avoided by white capital. This is what also allows for that mythology around what Black business can do and what a segregated economy might do. But that's not the reality for how wealth is produced. And as we see in the music industry, this is a perfect example of what happens. As soon as there's some interest and some ability to impact white affluent communities, here they come. And then black business, of course, the music record, the people, they of course want that influx of revenue and sales. And as they point out here, as an example, many of Elvis Presley's hits in the 1950s, when he was a dominant force in the music scene, were nothing but cover versions of hits in the then fairly small black market. The lack of interest in the black market exhibited by the major record companies also had implications for black artists. It meant that unless a black artist was willing to sever his ties with black music and instead work in the field of popular music, he would be unable to gain wide exposure. Now, the hustle has been, over the last 50-some years since this report came out, has been the shift in having black artists and black musicians producing a form of what becomes popular music that seems authentically black, that is nominally at least more authentic to the black community, which gives this false impression that popular black celebrities have not divorced themselves or severed their ties with black music. That's how you end up having major black celebrity be able to become the spokespersons for the most white conservative politics, but seeming to be absolutely authentically connected to the hood and to the community. Perfect example, my recent discussion of Snoop and his defense of his 15-year-old friendship with David Sachs, the most white conservative, Peter Thiel, Elon Muskian, crypto corporate colonists, that's the crowd. But because Snoop has appeared to come out of an authentically black experience where he has not had to sever ties with black music, and he's been associated with so many songs that my generations and others continue to enjoy, that's why I'm saying you got to be more critical when you like it. He's able to, he's able to be seen as not having severed his ties with the black community, but intellectually, politically, and it could be argued culturally, he absolutely has. An examination of how the record music market works from the point at which a record released by a record company to the point at which the consumer makes his purchase reveals that radio is the critical link. For the record to sell, it must receive exposure. Practically speaking, that means the record be played on the radio. To do that, the record must get on a playlist. How do you get on a playlist? Well, they start talking about payola, other forms of manipulation. This is exactly what has to happen to this day. You have to make it onto those Spotify and Apple and Google, YouTube playlists. You have to make it on to the roster of one of the three dominant international conglomerate-owned record companies. So in this case, nothing has ever changed, and this is just pointing to the important dynamic, as it says, of how do you make something popular. It is not an organic process. It is not something that just happens. And we're not talking about popularity in small communities and local, stars in their neighborhoods and whatever. We're talking about national and international celebrity. To reach that, you got to get put into the system. You got to get plugged into the system, and you have to become part of what those in power see as viable and acceptable. So here they get in a little bit of the weeds. It's a little bit dated here, but how popularity in black communities is then marshaled as a sign. They call it a test market for what might take off in white communities. And this is, of course, an old, black people say it's cool. Then we can definitely get involved. But again, to my point, the record company can create interest in a new record and anticipation for it by heavily promoting and advertising it before it's released. Again, this shouldn't be seen as controversial, but often overlooked largely because we get defensive around things we like, and we want to think that we are liking something because it has organically made it to us and that we organically, naturally like it. Like is an imposed construct in many ways. And more to the point, it comes at the tail end of a process. In sum, soul radio is of strategic importance to the record companies for two principal reasons. First, it provides access to a large and growing record-buying public, namely black consumers.
Message!
Black radio outlets. Now, I don't know exactly how they define it. I don't remember them getting into this definition in this book or this report. But remember, soul radio or black radio, then as now, works in the same way. needs to be understood in similar ways. That is it black because it's owned by black people? Is it black because it's targeting black people? Is it black because it trades mostly in black commercial media product? Those need to be distinguished. And then even when the entity is black owned, it is still dependent on the advertising revenue, the marketing budgets, the record labels, and everything else that comes out of the white world. So even black ownership is in many ways irrelevant to the mechanism, to the structure. It is a nominal feature. It is very much the flag independence that Fanon and Lumumba were talking about that we'll be highlighting on Monday. But again, the point is black media, today's podcast platforms, YouTube channels, they're important in carrying the promotional capacity and material of white conservative corporate capitalist colonial messaging and products. It's described here as being important because it reaches black consumers, because black audiences are listening to those outlets, because black audiences are convinced through reality or hype that it is a black operation that they're supporting. They're getting media that's targeting them, but it is being described here as being important to the white companies. And this is such an important point. Our black press, our black media has been reduced to being important to bringing black audiences comfortably, unquestioningly into white consciousness, conservative, reactionary, hostile, colonial, capitalist consciousness. Secondly, and for some of the record companies more important, it is perhaps the most effective way of getting a record into the top 40 playlist. The point being, once black people say something is cool, white people want to adopt it. They talk about payola a little bit here, the history that I and others have been talking about for a long time. Is just the process by which people pay to play. And today there's not, it may be different, it may be more secretive or differently, but in other words, you don't get on a playlist without one of the major record labels or their subsidiaries or emissaries paying or to get you there. They were already talking about in 1972, playlists and black radio stations are getting tighter and DJs have diminishing discretion over what is played. We've talked about this for a long time. It used to be the DJ could go and do and promote, then the playlist and what gets played got put into the hands of program directors. The importance of black radio as an avenue of access to the black consumer market and as a springboard to the top 40 charts through the phenomenon of crossover is likely to continue. They talk about having to compete with other companies and getting in early for who's going to control this black market. Thus, an expanded CRG Soul program could quickly achieve a decided advantage over other major record companies entering this market if it did something they are not likely to do, to put together a well-thought-out, well-planned, and well-financed initiative aimed at long-term market penetration rather than short-term profits from an opportunistic creaming program.
Phrasing?
And this is why I think this is so important. We have to be respectful, even if we, as I do, see these folks as enemies and as hostile. We have to respect that they are putting in work to figure out how to manipulate us. This manipulation does not just come easily. There's mass communications fields of study created, billions of dollars invested in studies for in ad campaigns, marketing campaigns, psychological warfare campaigns, from the military's perspective, counterinsurgency campaigns, all designed to find ways to mess with us. They're putting in the effort. This is just one report 50 years ago from one company, and look at what they're talking about. They're saying we have to study more. We have to learn more about black consumers. We don't know enough. We haven't paid enough attention to this market. Now, they talk about it in terms of trying to squeeze whatever finance is left, but I think it needs to be talked about at least as much in its ability, this systems, this mechanism, this process's ability to determine what becomes popular, what forms of art become popular, what are the political messages in that art. This is a self-criticism that they're offering here. We're not doing enough. We're not studying enough. We're not manipulating enough. So when they talk about the rationale for this study, they talk about, obviously, the potential for profitability could be significant. And they predict how much more profits they'll be making. And then they say the time is opportune. Whatever pressures there are for payola and black radio will probably subside in the short run, but perhaps long enough to allow CRG to broaden its participation in soul. As the dominant firm in the recording industry, there's no reason why Columbia should forfeit any segment of the total market to its competitors. Soul music has broad national appeal, which extends far beyond black consumers. How does Columbia stay in the top 100, the hot 100? Get more black art. Soul music is one of the very few basic art forms which is indigenous to America, although its own roots may be traced to Africa. It has been and probably will continue to be a vital and influential force in contemporary popular culture, and soul is by no means a static music form. I think it's funny that even Columbia Records is making a point about the pan-African nature of black music that some today would want to deny. I think that's the reverse hashtag community is fascinatingly even behind the awareness of the record company. And this is not for me to say that Harvard and the business, the music industry are where we should go for our analysis and historical awareness. I'm just saying the point is they're trying to study the history because they want to best understand how to manipulate. So they're saying, yeah, this is an African product. Yeah, these black people are by extension themselves African, but it's not going anywhere. It's got influence over everyone. Everybody loves this. We have to be involved in manipulating and injecting ourselves in the process of its production, its wealth producing capability, and its immaterial impact on shaping the consciousness and ultimately behavior of its listeners. Plan of action. Expand external sources of product by augmenting present custom label activity, increasing outside product sources. Develop an internal means of soul music production generation. Find our own way to remove black soul producers from black entities and take full control of them. If we look at the music industry today, this is what many people are still confused by. All these so-called, going back 50 years, black-owned record labels are only in names. They are subsidiaries to larger entities. They are funded by larger entities because they are the internal production of soul music. It's funny, they're even worried about antitrust, monopolization, if they acquire too much. So some of what they talk about doing is working through subsidiaries, which is exactly what we end up seeing today. It's fascinating to see Soul Train come up. Television is considered a white medium. There's increasing pressure for minority program, from Nicholas Johnson, FCC commissioner, to the recent Black Caucus on media. Oh, so they want more representation, do they? It is my feeling that the young white audience of today is not half as hung up on seeing and digging black artists as the older white generation who control television programming. Thus, if more black-oriented programs and black artists were given national exposure, the effect on ratings may not be as detrimental as feared. And why are they saying this? Because they're saying, we own those black artists. We own that black art. That's what we're talking about doing. So we're happy to see some more diversity in programming because we own it. You want more black people on TV? Fine, we'll put the ones we own on TV. And to this day, that is exactly what we see. All of the dominant black celebrity in whatever form, political to entertainment, are extensions of white capital. With CRG entering the black market, it would be in its, and therefore CBS Incorporated's best interest to do what it can to influence and encourage more black exposure on CBS television in particular, and on other television networks and stations in general. It is interesting to note that NBC and RCA work together to bring out color television. They have to be saying pun intended, right? Look at what they're saying. We, the whitest of corporations, want to produce more black exposure on our owned television. Because all it's going to do is create an incestuous process by which we popularize the artists we own, we make the most money, we convince the oppressed community that they are becoming more and more free and able to participate. And over 50 years, going back to my point about Snoop, we find a way to sort of collapse that mythology that black celebrity is severing from the black community. And then, they made color TV, so we'll put more coloreds on TV. By the way, they're talking about Soul. So in continuing to talk about Soul Train, which they call an independently produced Black Dick Clark type show, that's fascinating. Were CBS television to syndicate this show with only minor alterations, such as using several different cities for location and including occasional white soul acts, it could pick up a substantial young black and white national audience. It's only a matter of time before some network picks it up. Look at then what they have to say about black business in the black community. Currently, Columbia Record Group owns record retail outlets in various cities, but none in the ghetto areas of these cities. At first glance, it would seem that establishing these stores in ghetto areas would only succeed in putting the mom and pop out of business while creating unneeded ill will and trouble. Nevertheless, it would be very desirable for CRG to have such outlets because it could have a direct pulse on what is happening at the black retail level. A pulse so important that Atlantic and Motown are in daily contact with their key inner city retailers. A way of getting around the ill will that could be generated by CRG ownership of ghetto record stores would be to establish stores on franchise bases. Do you remember our recent discussion around Tom Burrell, the advertising exec, and the history he tells about his work in support of McDonald's in its support of the Nixonian administration's goals to expand black capitalism as a way to suppress black revolution and redefine black power as black capitalism? This is exactly what they talked about. Direct white ownership and involvement in ghetto operations. We don't want that. It's too overt. It's too direct. Plus, white folks don't really want to go in there even if they have to do it for their job. So we'll hire some black ones. We'll hire some black ones and franchise them and use black business to, again, give white colonial capitalist entree into the black community. If the owner-managers belong to the community in which they set up shop, they would have the advantage of knowing the community. Little opposition could be voiced because these young people are as entitled as the mom and pops to start their own business. The venture would help build black capital. The community would benefit from lower prices and wider variety, and CRG would not only get the information it needed, but its image as a leader in minority business development would be enhanced. It's just bars.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
And then they have a whole section here concluding the report on public and industry image. Again, all of this. And when they say here, by the way, if owner managers, when you become an owner of a franchise, you still have to follow the mandates of that franchise. You still have to kick up. And as they're saying here, we're good with that because it gives us the information we need and the symbolic coverage we need. So they start talking about doing all this stuff that you see stereotypically with the gangsters in the community to improve our image. Let's buy turkeys for Christmas from a black grower and give them out to the community. Let's support. Here are some things CRG could consider doing. One word of caution: they must be done tastefully. They're even saying, got to be careful now. This is exactly what Nielsen is saying today around all these black buying power reports. They just have black women usually tailoring the report so that they don't have to say do it tastefully. They have a black woman sort of massaging the information to a black audience so it doesn't feel distasteful. But they should support black charity functions, contribute food to the poor through radio stations, and perhaps the Panthers. Let's support the Black Panther Party. And then establish minority music scholarships and grants. My goodness, this is exactly what still goes on to this day. My goodness, this is exactly what goes on to this day. So anyway, that's why I was saying David Banner is wrong. That's why I was saying anyone is wrong to tell us that we should be more concerned with ownership than organized labor. Ownership is irrelevant. Ownership doesn't help the collective. We need unionized labor, organized labor, and an appropriate cut of the wealth we have all already helped produce. So salute to the Harvard Report. And many thanks to you all for checking this out. Please do again like, share, subscribe. Find a way to support the platform. And as always, peace. Only if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. And I'll catch you next time right here at
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.